The cold air bit through the thin fabric of her clothes as she stumbled through the forest. Her bare feet scraped against the rough ground, a harsh reminder of the life she had been trapped in, barely a shadow in the world of those who ruled it. She couldn't remember how long she had been running, but the urgency in her chest told her it was a matter of life or death. The wind howled through the trees like a wild creature chasing her down. But there was no escaping what she was, not anymore. Her name? Lost in the darkness of her past, she had none. Not one she could remember. Her voice? Stolen from her the moment she became part of the pack. She had no say, no ability to speak her truth. Her freedom? That had been taken when they branded her as theirs, owned, subjugated. A creature bound to the pack's will. Her heart raced, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, fear twisted inside her chest. Her wolf, wild, untamed, desperate, fought against the leash that held her back. Her pulse thudded louder than the pounding of her feet on the earth beneath her, like a drum beat that only served to remind her how much time had passed, how much of her had been lost. It was in the chaos of those thoughts that she felt it. Him. A low growl sliced through the air, sharp and deadly, vibrating against her ribcage. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The Alpha. Her steps faltered, but she caught herself, determination flashing through her like a surge of adrenaline. Escape. That was all she had left. She wanted to run. She had to run. But her body wouldn't obey. The moment his presence touched her, everything in her locked down. Fear, instinct, submission. They were all one now. She had no choice but to obey. She had no choice, but a part of her, a small part, longed for something else. He appeared before her in an instant, the brush of his footsteps a whisper on the cold wind. His eyes locked on her, silver and piercing, gleaming like the moon above. He was a monster, a predator, carved from the deepest shadows. And yet, his gaze, it was not just cold, it was possessive. "You can't run from me." His voice was a dark promise. Ruthless, commanding. She felt the weight of it settle over her like a vice, crushing the air from her lungs. It was no longer a question. It was a fact. She didn't answer. How could she? Her throat constricted as though it were wrapped in iron chains. Her breath came in shallow, panicked gasps, her wolf clawing at her chest, longing for the release of the wild. But there was no release. Not from him. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist in a grip that felt like fire. His touch was rough, unyielding. And yet, even as his hold burned into her skin, it stirred something darker in her, a yearning she couldn't explain. "You think you can escape me?" His voice was more a statement than a question, full of contempt and amusement. His words were like the sting of a lash against her bare skin, but beneath the cruelty there was something deeper, a magnetic pull, a promise. She felt it between them, a bond that should have terrified her, and yet she didn't know what it was. All she knew was that her wolf knew. It felt him. She shook her head, fighting to maintain her ground, though she knew she had none. Her body was betraying her, her knees trembling, her heart pounding faster. She wanted to fight him, wanted to claw her way free from the chains of this bond, but she was too weak, too broken. He yanked her close, his breath hot against her ear. "You're mine," he growled. There was no affection in the words, no love, only claim. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest. She had been claimed long ago. By the pack, by them. But there was something about his touch, about the way he stood before her, that sent her world spiraling. She wanted to fight. She wanted to break free. But his presence, it broke her. The ache in her chest was unbearable, and with every moment she stood before him, it grew stronger. "Say it," he commanded, his grip tightening around her wrist, his face inches from hers. "Say that you're mine." She wanted to scream at him, to break free, but the words stuck in her throat. "I am yours." Those words, so simple, so undeniable, echoed in her mind. A voice in the back of her head that had been silenced for so long, now whispered louder than ever before. Her wolf reacted, the tension in her body easing just a fraction, as though accepting what she could not. She had always been destined for this, hadn't she? She raised her eyes to meet his, her heart hammering in her chest, breath shallow. She opened her mouth to speak, to say something, anything, but nothing came out. Her voice was as silent as ever. His eyes narrowed. The slight flicker of something, dare she call it frustration, flashed across his face before it vanished, replaced by the cold mask of the alpha he was. His thumb brushed across the inside of her wrist, almost tenderly, but it didn't feel tender. It felt like a claim, and it felt like fate. "You think you're free?" His voice was quiet now, dangerous in its calmness. "No one escapes me, not even you." She was trapped. Her chest tightened, and for a brief, terrible moment, she thought her heart might stop altogether. But then he leaned closer, his lips brushing her ear in a way that made her skin break out in goosebumps. "I will break you," he whispered, his breath like fire against her skin. "And when I do, you will beg me to keep you." Her body tensed, and yet her heart betrayed her again, wanting him, aching for him, in a way she couldn't understand. She clenched her teeth, tears burning in her eyes, but she held them back. She couldn't let him see her weakness. "You're mine," he repeated, this time his words deeper, resonating within her very soul. Her wolf stirred within her, and she felt it, felt the shift in her. She wanted to fight, to scream, to run, but every instinct inside of her knew he was right. She belonged to him. He tilted her chin up, forcing her gaze to meet his once more. "Say it," he demanded, and his voice was an iron chain that bound her in place. "I'm yours," she whispered, her voice broken, the words more a plea than a statement. He smiled then, a slow, cruel smile that sent a thrill through her, one she hated but couldn't deny. And in that moment, as she stood before him, her world shifting, she knew this was only the beginning of what he would make of her. But she couldn't break free, not from him, and not from what was between them. The bond was formed, but at what cost? Chapter 2. The Claim of the Alpha. The night was darker now, the trees surrounding them like silent sentinels in the moonlight. The distant howls of the pack echoed across the landscape, a reminder of the Alpha's power, and a warning of the consequences to come. She stood frozen in place, her body still held captive by his iron grip. Her wolf, bound by instinct, couldn't help but respond to the Alpha's presence, a constant pull that felt both suffocating and exhilarating. I should have known, she thought, the bitter taste of regret seeping into her chest. I should have fought harder. But how could she? How could she fight something that was so deeply etched into her being? His presence made her feel weak, vulnerable. She wanted to escape. God, she wanted to run, but the very air around her seemed to hum with the weight of his authority. His grip on her wrist was unyielding, but not punishing. Instead, it was the kind of hold that told her she was being claimed, drawn into his world whether she wanted to or not. His scent, earthy and wild, seeped into her senses, intoxicating and overwhelming. "Say it again." The command sliced through the heavy silence like a knife, sharp and insistent. She flinched, but only for a moment. She knew what he was asking. He was forcing her to acknowledge something she had spent years trying to bury. His hand slid from her wrist to the back of her neck, pulling her closer with a force that left her breathless. She could feel the heat of his body, the raw power radiating from him like an untamed storm. "I'm yours," she said quietly, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. But they were true. She had no choice but to accept it. She was bound to him now, in ways she couldn't even begin to comprehend. His lips brushed against her temple, the touch gentle, almost tender. But there was a darkness beneath it, a predatory hunger that threatened to consume everything. "Good," he murmured, his voice low and gravelly. "You'll learn to understand what that means. Every part of you will belong to me in every way." She shuddered at the implication, but her wolf reacted, responding to the Alpha's power, to his claim. She hated herself for it, but it was the truth. Her body, her instincts, they wanted him. The Alpha stepped back, finally releasing his hold on her, but the distance between them felt like an illusion. She could still feel the heat of him, the pull of his presence, like gravity keeping her tethered to him. "You're not free," he said, his eyes dark and unreadable, "and you never will be again." She wanted to argue, to scream, to lash out, but she couldn't. Her voice, her will, were bound by chains that had been forged long before this moment. He had taken them from her, piece by piece, until all that remained was a hollow shell of the woman she had once been. The Alpha's gaze flickered toward the distant howls of the pack, his expression hardening. "It's time," he said, his tone cold and commanding. "We go back." Her heart sank at his words. Back to the pack, the place she had once tried so hard to escape. The very thought of returning to them, made her want to crawl out of her skin. The Alpha's hand was at her back again, guiding her forward with a firm, unrelenting pressure. "Move," he ordered, and she obeyed, the tension in her limbs making every step feel like a betrayal. But as they walked, she couldn't shake the sense of dread creeping over her. The pack would know now. They would know that the Alpha had claimed her. What would they think of her now? The question gnawed at her, but she couldn't bring herself to ask. The Alpha's silent presence crushed any hope of escape. Every part of her was screaming to run, but the bond between them kept her in check. She had no voice, no power, no choice. As they reached the edge of the forest, the moonlight revealed the sprawling camp ahead. The pack was gathered, the air thick with anticipation. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispers rising from their lips as the Alpha led her into their midst. "She's finally here," the Alpha claimed her. The words washed over her, sharp as knives. She could feel the weight of their judgment, the silent accusations, the questions hanging in the air. But she kept her head down, refusing to look anyone in the eye. She didn't belong here, not anymore, not after what had been done to her. The Alpha stepped forward, and the pack fell silent. The moment he spoke, it was as though the world itself held its breath. "This one," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "is mine. She has been claimed, and her place is at my side." A ripple of surprise passed through the pack. Some shifted nervously, others exchanged uncertain glances, but there was no doubt in the air. None. The Alpha had spoken. She was his. The weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. Her heart pounded in her ears, the sound drowning out everything else. She wanted to scream, she wanted to run, but she was trapped. She was bound to him now. A figure stepped forward from the crowd, his eyes, wild, defiant, locked onto her. The Beta. "Alpha," the Beta said, his voice full of challenge. "You've claimed her. But what does she want?" The question hung in the air, sharp and heavy. The beta's eyes flickered toward her, daring her to speak, to show some sign of rebellion. But she couldn't. Her throat closed up, her voice lost in the mire of her own fear. She couldn't fight. Not against the Alpha, not against the bond. The Alpha's hand tightened at her side, his thumb brushing the skin of her wrist. His touch was possessive, but there was something else, something deeper, darker. He was marking her, claiming her, not just for the pack, but for himself. "She wants what I want," the Alpha said coldly, "and that's all that matters." The beta narrowed his eyes, but he didn't argue. The Alpha's word was law, and that law was absolute. She stood in the middle of the pack, feeling their eyes on her, feeling the weight of their expectations pressing down. But there was something else in the air now, something more than fear. It was desire. The Alpha had claimed her, and that meant in his world there was no escape. Her fate was sealed. As the Alpha turned and began to lead her deeper into the camp, a shiver ran down her spine. She felt the beta's gaze on her, heavy, lingering. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if it was fear or something darker that twisted in her chest. Was the beta jealous of the Alpha's claim, or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? The answers lay in the shadows of the pack, and she had a feeling they would come for her, sooner rather than later. Chapter 3. The Heart of the Pack. The night grew colder as they moved deeper into the camp, the firelight flickering in the distance like a beacon. She could hear the crackling of the flames, the murmur of voices, but none of it reached her. It was all distant, muted, like she was living in some other world, one where the only thing that mattered was the Alpha's presence beside her. She barely registered the other members of the pack as they passed by, their gazes full of curiosity, judgment, and something else. Desire. She could feel it in their eyes, the way they studied her as if they could see every secret buried deep inside her, every weakness she had spent years trying to hide. Her chest tightened. It was no longer just the Alpha that held power over her. It was all of them. Every single member of this pack. They were wolves, feral, untamed, and dangerous. And she, standing here at their center, felt nothing more than prey. The Alpha's hand was still at her back, firm and possessive, urging her forward with every step. But it wasn't just a guiding hand. It was a claim, and it was clear to everyone who saw them that she was his. No one would dare challenge that. They reached a large clearing, illuminated by the soft glow of torches. In the center of the clearing, a massive stone platform sat beneath an ancient oak tree, its branches reaching high into the night sky like the arms of an ancient god. The Alpha led her toward it, his movements deliberate, measured, as if every step he took was a mark on her fate. The moment they reached the stone platform, he stopped, turning to face her. "This is where you'll stand," he said, his voice low, commanding. "From now on, this is your place." Her breath hitched as she looked around. The other members of the pack had gathered at the edges of the clearing, their eyes fixed on her with a strange mixture of interest and restraint. No one dared to speak, but the air was thick with expectation. The Alpha's eyes never left hers as he moved behind her, his body pressing close enough that she could feel the heat of him at her back. She didn't need to look to know he was still in control, still commanding every inch of the space between them. She wanted to nod, to comply, but she couldn't find the strength. Every part of her resisted, but it was futile. Her body was betraying her. The pull between them was too strong, too primal. Her wolf craved him, needed him. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but enough for him to hear. He didn't acknowledge her words at first. Instead, he stepped away from her, making a slow, deliberate circle around her. She could feel his gaze burning into her skin, could hear the whispers from the pack as they watched. Luna. The word struck her like a physical blow. She wasn't ready for that. She didn't want it. She had never asked for this, had never sought out this life. And yet, here she was, the Alpha's claimed mate, the Luna of the pack. The Alpha stopped in front of her, his silver eyes gleaming with something dark and intense. He took her chin in his hand, lifting her face to meet his gaze. "You are mine now," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't place, something raw and unfiltered, an emotion that burned through her and threatened to consume her. His hand moved to her shoulder, pushing her back slightly. "And you will never be free again." She wanted to fight, to scream, to claw her way free from him, but the moment the words left his lips, she felt the chains around her tighten. It wasn't just his grip on her body. It was something deeper, something that went to the very core of her. His touch was a brand, marking her for all to see. His thumb traced the edge of her jaw, the gesture gentle, almost intimate. And yet, she could feel the weight of his control in every movement. She was his, and there was no escape from that. Suddenly, the sound of a sharp breath drew her attention. Her eyes flickered to the side, where the beta stood watching them with a narrowed gaze. His posture was tense, but there was something in his eyes, something darker, more dangerous than she had seen before. "Alpha," the beta said, his voice low but laced with challenge. "You've claimed her, but what does she truly want? What does she feel?" The Alpha's hand tightened on her jaw, pulling her gaze back to him. "She doesn't need to feel anything," he growled, his tone dark with something possessive. "She will learn to feel me." The beta's gaze flickered to her again, his eyes searching, calculating. "And what if she doesn't?" he asked, his voice cool but heavy with suspicion. "What if she resists?" "She won't resist," the Alpha said with an unyielding confidence. "I'll make sure of it." The beta didn't reply. Instead, he turned away, his footsteps slow and deliberate as he walked back into the shadows of the clearing. But the unease didn't leave her. The beta's words lingered in her mind. What if she resisted? The Alpha watched her, waiting for some kind of reaction. "You don't speak, but you will learn," he said, his voice cold, but with an edge of something more, something that made her shiver. "You will speak to me, and you will never doubt your place beside me." Her heart thudded in her chest. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to fight for the freedom she had lost. But she couldn't. Not against him, not against the pack. She was his, and there was no turning back. As the Alpha turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the clearing, a new wave of panic surged through her. The pack began to disperse, but something wasn't right. She could feel the eyes on her, the pack's eyes, and she knew, deep down, that the beta's challenge was far from over. He was watching, waiting, and soon his questions would find their answer. The question was, would she be ready for it? Chapter 4. Beneath the Moonlight. The moon hung high in the sky, its pale light filtering through the canopy of trees above the clearing. The shadows seemed to deepen, stretching like long, twisted fingers across the earth. The air felt charged with a palpable tension, as though the very fabric of the night itself was waiting for something, anything, to break the stillness. She stood alone in the center of the clearing, her heart pounding against her chest. The Alpha's words echoed in her mind. "You will learn to feel me." The weight of his claim pressed down on her, suffocating her in ways she couldn't explain. She had tried to fight it, tried to run, but now it felt as though the bond between them was inescapable, woven into the very fibers of her being. "I don't belong here," she thought, the bitter taste of those words lingering in her mouth. "I never asked for this. but there was no denying the truth. She was here, and whether she accepted it or not, she was now bound to him, to the pack, to everything she had tried so desperately to escape. A shiver ran down her spine, the cold of the night air cutting through her thin clothing. Her feet felt rooted to the ground, unwilling to move. She was a prisoner, but more than that, she was an unwilling participant in a game that had already been set into motion. The Alpha's words were not just promises, they were threats, and the pack would hold her to them. She clenched her fists, the nails digging into her palms, trying to channel some semblance of strength. A rustle of leaves behind her made her jump. Her heart raced, but before she could react, she felt a heavy presence behind her, his presence, the Alpha. She didn't turn to face him. She couldn't. Not yet. "You're mine now," his voice cut through the silence like a blade, sending a shiver through her bones. "And you will learn to accept that." She didn't respond. Her body trembled with the effort of keeping her emotions in check. The urge to fight, to scream, was overwhelming, but she could feel the leash that tied her to him, as tight and unyielding as ever. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, as he moved around her, positioning himself in front of her. The weight of his gaze pressed down on her like an iron shackle. "Look at me," he commanded softly, but there was no mistaking the underlying steel in his tone. Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to disobey, to refuse him, to assert some semblance of control over her own fate, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Slowly, reluctantly, her head lifted and her eyes met his. His gaze was intense, silver eyes glowing with an inner fire, burning through her defenses like they were made of paper. For a moment she felt exposed, raw, vulnerable, naked. "You think you can fight me?" he asked, his voice dark, the hint of a smirk playing on his lips. "You think you can resist?" Her pulse quickened. She didn't want to answer him. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction, but the answer was already written in her bones, in the pull of her wolf toward him. "I don't want this," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Her voice was fragile, almost broken. He tilted his head, considering her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, his expression softened, just slightly. But it wasn't tenderness that touched his features. It was something more dangerous, possessive. "You'll learn to want this," he said, his voice low and smooth, the words lingering in the air between them like a promise. "You will. And when you do, you'll understand why I claimed you." Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. She wanted to fight him, to scream, to run, to tear herself away from his touch. But she couldn't. Every part of her was drawn to him. Her wolf, her instincts, everything inside of her screamed that he was the one. She could feel it now, that pull, that bond. It wasn't just physical, it was deeper, something ancient and primal that she couldn't escape, no matter how much she tried. He reached out, his fingers grazing her cheek with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the intensity in his eyes. "You're mine," he repeated, as though saying it aloud would make it true. "And I will make sure you remember that." The words were like a hammer to her chest, driving the last remnants of her resistance into the ground. She wanted to fight. She wanted to scream. But she was his. She felt it in every fiber of her being. The Alpha stepped back, his gaze never leaving her. "The pack is waiting for you," he said, his voice cold, all traces of gentleness gone. "They will expect you to learn your place. You will stand with me, by my side, and show them that you belong here." Her heart twisted at his words. Stand with him? By his side? The very thought made her feel sick to her stomach, but she knew she had no choice. She was his, now and forever. She nodded, though it felt like the ultimate betrayal to herself. He nodded once, satisfied with her obedience. Good. His voice was thick with satisfaction. He turned, his back to her, but not before he cast one last glance over his shoulder. Follow me. The pack needs to see that their Luna is in control. She stood still for a moment, the words hanging in the air like a weight. Luna. The title sounded foreign on her tongue, as though it belonged to someone else. Someone stronger. Someone who had a place here, but not her. Not the woman who had spent her whole life running from this world. She hesitated, her feet rooted to the spot, but the Alpha's commanding presence beckoned her forward. She didn't have the strength to resist anymore, not against him, not against the pull between them. The pack was waiting. As she walked toward the waiting pack, a cold chill crept down her spine. The beta was there, his eyes watching her with an unsettling intensity. And behind him, the pack stood, silent, calculating. She felt their eyes on her, felt the weight of their judgment, their expectations. And as she stepped closer to the Alpha, her heart raced, uncertainty twisting in her gut. Was this truly her place, or had she just walked into a cage of her own making? The answer, she feared, would come sooner than she thought. Chapter 5. The Alpha's Test. The pack was gathered, their eyes like shadows in the dim light of the torches that lined the edges of the clearing. The murmurs of their voices, low and vibrating with curiosity, filled the air, but there was no warmth in their gaze, no welcome. Only the cold weight of judgment. She felt it as soon as she stepped into the circle, the way the pack's eyes seemed to fixate on her, assessing her, judging her. The beta's gaze burned the hardest, filled with something she couldn't quite place, an unsettling mix of intrigue and something darker. Her heart thudded in her chest, the weight of the Alpha's presence at her back, both grounding and suffocating. He stood behind her, silent, powerful, as though her very existence was his claim to control. She could feel the pack's anticipation like a living thing, pressing against her, testing her resolve. She will be a test. The beta's voice cut through the crowd, the words like a blade, smooth and chilling. To see if she is truly worthy to stand beside the Alpha. Her pulse quickened. Worthy. The word echoed in her head, filling her with a sense of foreboding. Was she worthy? Of the Alpha's claim? Of the pack's approval? Or was she simply the Alpha's latest conquest, another possession to add to his collection? The Alpha's grip tightened on her shoulder, a silent reminder of his dominance, but also a strange kind of security, as if, for the first time in her life, there was someone who would shield her. Or perhaps trap her. The beta's lips twisted into a smirk, but there was no warmth in it, just cold calculation. "We shall see, Alpha," he said, and the pack shifted, murmuring in agreement. The Alpha stepped forward then, moving to the center of the clearing. His voice rang out, commanding the silence of the crowd. "This is not just a test of her worth," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "This is a test for all of you, to see where your loyalty lies." She felt her stomach twist at the implication. She wasn't just the one being tested. They were all watching, judging. If she failed, it would be more than just her loss. It would be the pack's judgment on the Alpha's choice. The Alpha's gaze never wavered, his confidence radiating from him in waves. Tonight, she will prove that she belongs with me. Or she will be cast aside. A ripple of unease washed through the pack, the silence that followed suffocating. It was clear now. This was no mere display of power. This was a battle. For her place, for her worth. The beta sneered, crossing his arms as he stood back, observing. "Let's see if she can stand up to what it means to be with the alpha," he muttered, loud enough for the pack to hear. "Or if she'll fall like the others before her. The others before her." The words struck her like a blow. What had happened to the women before her? What had the alpha done to them? Had they failed? A sharp pain lanced through her chest at the thought. She couldn't fail. Not again. She couldn't be cast aside. The alpha's eyes softened just slightly, catching the flicker of fear in her expression. He stepped forward, his presence overwhelming, as he placed his hand gently on her back, guiding her toward the center of the circle. His fingers grazed her skin, sparking a shiver down her spine. "Do not fear," he murmured, his voice low, intimate. "You belong to me now. No one will take you from me." But there was something in his eyes, something that made her wonder if even he believed the words. Was he truly protecting her, or was he testing her too? The pack parted to allow them to reach the center. There, standing beneath the watchful gaze of every member, the alpha paused. His hand was still on her back, but it felt like the weight of the world was upon her shoulders. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear their silent judgment. She felt small, fragile, exposed. The beta stepped forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "Let's see how strong you really are," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He raised a hand, signaling for a challenge. She flinched as a wolf, a strong, dark-furred beast, stepped from the shadows, its eyes glowing with the same intensity as the alpha's. This was no simple display, no simple test. The beta was testing her strength, her resolve, her ability to survive. "Fight," the beta commanded. A sickening realization hit her like a slap. She was supposed to fight this wolf. Her hands trembled at her sides, and the fear bubbled up in her chest. She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't strong enough for this. She had never been meant for this life. The wolf snarled, its sharp teeth gleaming in the firelight. Its muscles rippled beneath its dark coat, powerful and sleek. It took one step toward her, and she could feel its gaze locked on her, calculating, waiting for her move. The alpha's hand was still on her back, grounding her, but she could feel the heat of his presence, the weight of his expectations. He was waiting for her to prove herself, to prove that she belonged beside him. The beta's voice rang out, loud and commanding, "Fight or fall, fight or fall." There was no middle ground. There was no escape. The wolf lunged forward, its claws striking the earth with a resounding crack. Her instincts kicked in, but they were no match for the power of the creature before her. She had been trained to survive, yes, but this was different. She dodged, the wolf's teeth snapping just inches from her skin. Her breath caught in her throat as she stumbled backward, her mind racing. What was she supposed to do? The alpha's voice rang out from behind her, low but clear. "Don't run. Face it. You're mine now." And with that simple command, the fear inside her shattered. Her body shifted, instincts taking over as she finally met the wolf's gaze, a flash of steel in her eyes. She was his, and she would prove it. Her wolf rose inside her like a flood, fierce and untamed. She was no longer the weak, trembling woman from moments ago. She was a warrior, his warrior. With a fierce snarl, she leaped toward the wolf, claws extended. The battle had begun. Just as her claws made contact with the wolf's fur, the world seemed to stop. She felt the power of her wolf surge through her like wildfire, but in that instant, the ground beneath her feet trembled. A low growl echoed through the clearing, coming not from the wolf, but from somewhere deeper, louder. But this one wasn't part of the pack. It was something darker, something dangerous. The alpha's grip on her tightened, his voice hard in her ear. "You're not the only one being tested tonight." Chapter 6. the pack's blood. The air shifted, thickening with an unfamiliar tension. The earth beneath her feet trembled once more, a low, ominous growl vibrating through the ground. It was a sound that didn't belong. It was different, darker. The wolf that had challenged her faltered for just a moment, its ears perked, sensing something she couldn't see. Then it happened again. The ground shook more violently this time, the torches flickering as the shadows stretched and swayed. The other wolves in the pack started growling low, their instincts alert, their eyes wide with unease. "What is that?" The beta's voice was full of disbelief, his gaze darting to the trees at the edge of the clearing. "It shouldn't be here." The alpha's hand, still firm on her back, tightened. She could feel the power radiating off him, the strength that was both his shield and his weapon. He was calm, but there was an edge to his stillness, a quiet storm waiting to break. The growl came again, louder this time, and the pack's collective tension grew palpable. Wolves began to shift restlessly on their paws, their eyes darting to the forest line, ears straining to catch every sound. The alpha's gaze never left her, though, his eyes burning with an intensity that both reassured and terrified her. "Stay close," he muttered, his voice low but commanding. "Don't move unless I say so." Her heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure if it was fear or adrenaline racing through her veins. The wolf she had just fought, the one that had been her opponent, was now retreating, its posture stiff, wary. But there was something more dangerous in the air now, something that made even the alpha pause. And then the howl came again, closer this time. It was deep, a sound that rattled her bones, a sound that carried with it the promise of something ancient and predatory. The alpha turned, his eyes narrowing, his body becoming rigid with alertness. "This is no ordinary wolf." His voice, though low, carried across the clearing, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Stay close to me. The pack—" He was interrupted by another bone-shaking howl, louder than the last. The trees at the edge of the clearing began to rustle as something massive moved through the forest, pushing aside the foliage with a disturbing ease. Her pulse quickened, her instincts screaming for her to run, but she stayed frozen in place, her gaze locked with the alpha's. "Do not move," he repeated, his hand now gripping her wrist in a vice-like hold, keeping her grounded. From the trees emerged a figure, a wolf, yes, but not like any wolf she had seen before. It was enormous, towering over the rest of the pack, its fur dark as midnight, almost blending with the shadows of the night. Its eyes glowed an unnatural red, and when it snarled, the sound was like thunder rumbling across the sky. Her breath hitched in her throat. This wolf, this was no ordinary creature. It was something far more dangerous. The pack instinctively stepped back, forming a loose circle around the alpha and her. Even the beta's confident stance faltered, and the murmurs in the crowd grew louder, tinged with fear and uncertainty. The alpha's gaze never left the creature. He was calm, his posture unwavering, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the flecks of muscles beneath his skin. "A rogue," he said, his voice filled with a cold authority that was unmistakable. "And not just any rogue. This one is different." The rogue wolf stepped forward, its massive frame moving with a predator's grace, its eyes locked onto the alpha, its lips curling back in a low guttural growl that sent chills down her spine. This wasn't a challenge, it was a declaration. The alpha didn't move, standing his ground. "What do you want?" His voice was a challenge in itself, strong, unwavering, powerful. But there was a coolness to it that made her skin crawl. The rogue wolf tilted its head, studying them both, before it spoke, a voice so deep and unnatural that it didn't seem to belong to any creature of this earth. "You have claimed her," it said, its voice dripping with malice. "And I will take what is mine." The words struck her like a physical blow. The rogue's gaze shifted to her, its eyes burning with a predatory hunger that made her blood run cold. "She is mine," it growled, its voice thick with venom. The Alpha's grip on her wrist tightened until it almost hurt, pulling her close. "She belongs to me," he snarled, his voice low and vicious. "You will not touch her." The rogue's eyes flashed with something darker, more menacing. It bared its teeth in a silent threat, but then, just as quickly, it turned, disappearing back into the shadows from which it came. The clearing was filled with an uneasy silence as the pack stood still, uncertain, watching the Alpha with a mixture of fear and awe. Even the Beta didn't speak, his gaze lingering on the retreating figure of the rogue. The Alpha turned to face her, his expression dark, hard. His grip on her wrist loosened, but only slightly. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice thick with something she couldn't place. "Do you understand now?" She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I don't understand. What was that thing? What does it want with me?" The Alpha's eyes flashed with something fierce, something cold. "The rogue," he said slowly, carefully, "is not just after you, it's after what you represent." Her confusion deepened, and she looked up at him, her breath shallow. "What do I represent?" He hesitated for a moment, his gaze flickering with something she couldn't decipher. "You represent a threat to him," he said finally, his voice like ice. "But more than that, you are something he cannot have, and that makes you his obsession." Her heart skipped a beat, the words sinking deep into her chest. The rogue wasn't just a rogue, it was a rival, and she was the prize. The sound of footsteps approached, and she tensed, expecting another attack. But it was just the Beta, his face tight, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Alpha," the Beta said, his voice low, almost cautious. "You know what this means, don't you? The rogue won't stop. It's not just about her, it's about control." The Alpha turned to him, his jaw clenched. "I know," he said quietly, his eyes flashing with a fierce protectiveness that sent a chill through her. "And I won't let him take what's mine." But in his eyes, there was something darker, something that made her wonder just how far he would go to protect her, and what he was willing to sacrifice in the process. The rogue wasn't just after her, it was after everything. And with that realization, a cold dread settled deep in her gut. The fight for her survival had only just begun. Chapter 7. The War for Her Heart. The night stretched on, the tension in the air thick enough to slice through with a knife. The Alpha's grip never wavered as he stood at her side, his presence like a fortress, unbreakable, unyielding. But despite the strength radiating from him, a flicker of uncertainty lingered in his eyes. The rogue was not just a wolf, it was a threat on a level she couldn't comprehend, and the Alpha knew it. The pack began to disperse, their whispers quiet but full of speculation. They had seen the rogue, they had heard its claim, and now they were waiting to see how the Alpha would respond. The Beta moved to the Alpha's side, his posture tense, the unease in his expression clear. "Alpha," he said, his voice low and cautious. "You know what this means. The rogue is not just hunting her, it's hunting you." The Alpha's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking toward the edge of the clearing where the rogue had disappeared. "I'm aware," he said, his voice like steel, but there was a flicker of something beneath the surface, something that spoke of old wounds, of a history far darker than she could imagine. She glanced between the two men, trying to understand what was happening. "What do you mean?" Her voice broke through the tension, but it felt small, fragile in the weight of their conversation. The Alpha turned to her, his gaze softening just slightly, though the fire in his eyes still burned with an intensity that made her heart race. "The rogue," he began, his voice steady but thick with something darker, "is not just a stray. He is my past. A rival." The beta's eyes flickered with something like unease, but the Alpha didn't hesitate. "He is a reminder of something I wish I could forget," he said, his voice low, almost regretful. "But he won't allow me to—" Her mind raced as she tried to process his words. She had been thrust into this world without understanding its full scope, but now the pieces were falling into place. The rogue wasn't just a rival in the physical sense, it was a reflection of something darker, something personal. "Why does he want me?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "What makes me a threat to him?" The Alpha took a step toward her, his gaze intense and full of meaning. "You don't understand yet," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But you will. You are mine. And that is something he cannot allow." A shiver ran down her spine, and for the first time she felt the weight of the bond between them. The Alpha's claim, his possession. She wasn't just a woman to him, she was a symbol of his power, his control, and the rogue wanted to tear it away. Before she could respond, a sharp howl echoed from the woods, closer this time. The sound was feral, primal, and filled with fury. The Alpha's expression hardened, and without another word, he turned on his heel. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Her heart pounded in her chest as she followed him, her eyes scanning the darkness. The rogue was coming back, but this time it would not retreat. It was here for a fight. The pack gathered once more, forming a defensive circle around the Alpha, their eyes wild with anticipation. The beta moved to the front, his posture tense, ready for whatever would come. The rest of the pack stood silent, watching, waiting, their loyalties divided, unsure of the rogue's next move. And then, from the shadows, the rogue appeared again, larger than before, more menacing. Its red eyes gleamed with malicious intent, and its growl sent a chill through her veins. "Alpha," the rogue said, its voice deep and guttural. "You think you can keep her? You think you can claim what is rightfully mine?" The Alpha stepped forward, his eyes locked with the rogue's. The air around them seemed to crackle with the tension, and the ground beneath her feet hummed with the weight of the confrontation. "She is mine," the Alpha said, his voice cold, final. "You have no claim here," the rogue snarled, its muscles tensing as it lunged forward, teeth bared. The pack moved in response, the wolves shifting into their full forms, ready to protect their Alpha and their claim. But it was clear that the rogue was a different kind of beast. It wasn't just here for a fight, it was here to destroy. The Alpha's eyes narrowed, and in one fluid motion, he shifted into his wolf form. He was massive, his body rippling with muscle, his fur as black as midnight. He let out a low growl, a warning to the rogue, but the rogue was undeterred. The battle began in an explosion of fur, teeth, and claws. The Alpha and the rogue collided with a force that made the earth tremble beneath their feet. The pack was on alert, but they were hesitant. They knew better than to intervene in a fight of this magnitude. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she watched the battle unfold. The sight of the Alpha in his wolf form was awe-inspiring, but it also terrified her. The power, the raw aggression. It was a reminder of how little control she truly had in this world. Her heart ached as she watched them, her Alpha fighting for her, for the claim he had over her. But the rogue, it wasn't just about her. This was something personal for the Alpha, something deeper. "Please," she whispered, though she knew no one could hear her. "Please don't let him take him." The rogue was relentless, its strength equal to the Alpha's, but the Alpha was quicker, more focused. His movements were precise, calculated, a reflection of the control he held over every part of his life. But even as the rogue fought, it was clear it wasn't just a battle of strength. It was a battle of wills. The rogue howled in pain as the Alpha's claws raked across its side, leaving deep gashes. But it wasn't finished. With a roar, it twisted and lunged for the Alpha's throat. "No!" she cried, instinctively stepping forward, but the beta's hand shot out, pulling her back. "Stay back," he growled, his eyes hard. "This is their fight." But it was impossible to stay still. Her heart pounded in her chest, her legs threatening to give way. She wanted to help. She wanted to do something, anything, to stop the rogue, to stop this war that was being waged over her. The Alpha roared again, louder this time, his body shifting and rolling with the rogue's every move. The pack, though uncertain, watched in silence, their eyes darting between the Alpha and the rogue, waiting for a shift in the battle. And then it came. With a final, devastating strike, the Alpha managed to land a blow to the rogue's chest, sending it crashing to the ground. The rogue's howl echoed through the forest, filled with pain and fury as it staggered to its feet. But the Alpha was already on him, his teeth sinking into the rogue's throat with brutal precision. A final snap, and the rogue's resistance faltered. The pack let out a collective breath, watching as the rogue collapsed, defeated. The Alpha stood over him, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with the intensity of the victory. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The Alpha shifted back into his human form, his breath ragged, his body covered in blood. His eyes locked onto hers, his expression unreadable, yet filled with something she couldn't quite place. "It's over," he said quietly, though his voice held a weight to it. But the rogue was only the beginning. Her heart skipped a beat, the fear rushing back to her in a flood. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He didn't answer immediately, his gaze flickering to the pack, then back to her. "The rogue was just one part of a much larger threat," he said, his voice thick with warning. "The war for you is far from over." The Alpha turned to the beta, his eyes narrowing. "Get the pack ready. We've just begun." And with that, the darkness of the night seemed to deepen, the shadows closing in around them, as the true fight for her heart and her survival had only just begun. Chapter 8. The Storm That Rises. The Alpha's words echoed in her mind like a haunting refrain. "The war for you is far from over." Her heart hammered in her chest, the weight of those words sinking deep into her bones. A war. What was happening? She had barely begun to understand the depth of the Alpha's world, the pack, the rogue, the violence, and now there was something larger at play, something darker. She stood frozen, the aftermath of the battle still thick in the air. The scent of blood lingered, mixing with the sharp tang of fear that seemed to permeate everything around her. The rogue was gone, but its presence still lingered, like a dark cloud on the horizon, ready to storm in again. The Alpha turned back to her, his eyes fierce and resolute, but there was a flicker of something else in them, a kind of raw exhaustion. His body was still covered in the rogue's blood, his chest rising and falling with every breath, but his focus remained sharp. "Come," he said, his voice low but full of command. "We need to move." Without waiting for her to respond, he started walking toward the edge of the clearing, where the pack was already gathering, their murmurs low and anxious. The beta stood off to the side, watching the Alpha carefully, his expression tight with something she couldn't place. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small, uncertain. Her legs felt weak beneath her, the adrenaline of the battle still coursing through her body, leaving her shaky. The Alpha didn't turn to answer. Instead, he kept walking, his steps purposeful. To the pack's stronghold, he called over his shoulder, his tone unwavering. "We need to fortify. The rogues' pack isn't the only threat we face. There are others." The thought of leaving the clearing behind, of walking into the unknown, made her stomach twist. Others. Who else could there possibly be? Who else wanted her? She followed him, her mind racing with questions, each one unanswered. The pack fell in line behind her, their faces drawn, wary. No one spoke as they moved through the dense forest, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. But it wasn't just the silence that made her feel uneasy, it was the unspoken tension between them all, the way the pack members watched her out of the corner of their eyes, as though they were still trying to figure her out. They arrived at a small clearing just beyond the trees, a hidden, fortified area that she hadn't seen before. Tall, ancient walls made of stone rose up from the ground, and a large, heavy wooden door stood at the center. There were no windows, only small, narrow slits carved into the stone walls. The structure felt ancient, almost as if it had been built for something far older than wolves. The Alpha motioned for her to enter first, his eyes still locked on the forest around them. She hesitated for a moment before stepping through the door, the sound of the thick wood creaking behind her as it closed with an echoing thud. Inside, the space was dim, lit only by the flickering glow of a few candles. The air was thick with the scent of wolves, of blood, of sweat. The pack settled into the room, their bodies tense, their eyes flickering to the Alpha for guidance. But it was clear that they weren't just waiting for orders, they were waiting for something else, for answers. The Alpha took his place at the center of the room, standing tall and unyielding. His gaze swept over the pack, each member falling into a hushed silence as his presence filled the space. "We've made it this far," he said, his voice carrying the weight of leadership. "But we're not safe yet. The rogues' pack is only the beginning." The Beta stepped forward, his expression dark and filled with something almost dangerous. "What are you saying, Alpha?" The Alpha's gaze narrowed, his jaw tightening as though he was holding back something dark. "There are others, wolves, who will come for her, and they won't stop until they get what they want." A murmur rippled through the pack, each member exchanging anxious glances. The Beta remained silent, his eyes never leaving the Alpha. The Alpha's eyes flicked to her, his expression unreadable. "She is more than a prize to them," he said quietly. "She is a key, a symbol." Her pulse raced as the pack's eyes turned to her, each one full of curiosity, fear, and something darker, something that made her feel like a piece on a chessboard, ready to be moved by forces she couldn't understand. "A key?" she repeated, her voice shaky. "What do you mean?" The Alpha's gaze softened for just a moment, the intensity in his eyes giving way to something almost vulnerable. "It's not just about you," he said quietly. "It's about the pack, about control." The Beta shifted uneasily, his lips pressed into a thin line. "You think this is about power? That's why they're after her?" The Alpha's expression hardened. "Yes, but it's more than that. She's not just a mate to me, she's something far more dangerous. And the rogues and the wolves after her, they know it. They want to control the pack, and they'll do anything to get her, to get what she represents." The words settled heavily in the room, the tension thick enough to choke on. She could feel the weight of the Alpha's gaze on her, but it wasn't just him who was watching. The entire pack, the entire room seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for her to understand. "What do I represent?" she asked, the question trembling on her lips. The Alpha's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "You're more than just my mate. You are the key to our survival." Her breath caught in her throat. "Our survival." "Yes," he said, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. "You are the key to everything, and until we understand why, you will have to stay with me. With us." Her mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. What was he talking about? What was she really to him? What was she to this pack? Why her? The Alpha stepped forward, closing the distance between them, his presence overwhelming. "You're not just my mate," he said softly, but the weight of the words hung heavy between them. "You are the future of this pack." She looked up at him, her heart in her throat. She could feel the storm that was brewing, the tension that threatened to break. She had been thrust into this world, into this fight, with no warning. And now she was the future. A sudden crash from outside the stronghold jolted them all into action, the sound of splintering wood and snarls piercing the air. The pack moved in an instant, ready for anything, but the Alpha held her back, his grip firm. "Stay inside," he commanded, his voice hard. She wanted to argue, to fight, to demand answers. But the storm outside was closer now, and she could feel the pack's tension rising again. The Alpha's eyes locked onto hers, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not over. The real war is only beginning, and they're coming for you." Her heart stopped as the weight of his words crashed down on her, and she realized the battle for her life was only just beginning. Chapter 9. The rising tide. The sound of snarling outside grew louder, punctuated by the frantic thrashing of something large and dangerous. She could feel the vibrations in the stone walls of the stronghold, each tremor a reminder that they were under siege. Her heart raced in her chest, but her legs felt rooted to the floor, as if the weight of the Alpha's words had anchored her to this place, to this moment. The pack was moving fast, their actions seamless as they readied themselves for the fight ahead. The Beta, ever vigilant, stood near the door, his eyes darting between the Alpha and the sounds coming from the outside. He didn't speak, but the tension in his posture spoke volumes. This wasn't a typical attack. She turned to the Alpha, standing tall and unwavering. His expression was cold, hard, but there was something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before, a trace of worry. Not for himself, but for her, for the pack. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice shaking despite herself. The Alpha turned to her, his jaw set, his gaze hardening with determination. "They've come for you." Her breath hitched. "They," she whispered. "Who? The rogue?" His eyes flashed briefly to the door, where the Beta stood, alert and poised. "Not just the rogue. There's a bigger force at play." He moved toward her, his pace deliberate, every inch of him radiating authority. He took her hand, pulling her toward the farthest corner of the room, away from the entrance. "I won't let them take you," he added, his voice softer but filled with steel. The Beta's voice cut through the growing chaos outside. "Alpha, we need to move. The gates won't hold much longer." The Alpha's gaze locked on his second in command, and without a word, the Beta nodded, stepping toward the door. The Alpha turned back to her, his expression softening, even though his grip tightened around her hand. "Stay behind me," he said, the command unmistakable in his tone. "No matter what happens, you stay with me. Understood?" Her heart twisted with fear, but she nodded. She couldn't bring herself to speak. She was no longer just a bystander in this world. She was a part of it now. And as much as she hated the thought of it, she knew she had no choice but to follow the Alpha's lead. Her life, her survival, was no longer in her own hands. The sound of clawed paws on stone filled the air as the beta opened the door to the stronghold. Her breath caught in her throat as the first wave of wolves appeared, their eyes glowing with hunger. But it wasn't just wolves. There were more. Humans, but not ordinary humans. They wore dark, tattered clothes, their eyes wild and filled with a madness she had never seen before. They were armed, carrying swords and daggers, but it wasn't their weapons that made her blood run cold. It was the way they moved, like they had been trained to hunt, to track, to kill. The Alpha's jaw clenched. Rogue wolves, and now humans, a pack within a pack. This is no simple raid. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of it all. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "They're called the Red Fangs," the Alpha said, his voice dark and filled with loathing. "They're a rogue faction, the most dangerous of them all. Not just wolves, humans who have sold their loyalty to the wildest of us. They hunt for power, for control." The sound of claws scraping against stone grew louder, and she could feel the pressure in the air thickening. Her chest tightened with fear, but she refused to let herself show it. She had to be strong now, strong for the Alpha, for the pack. "And now they're hunting you," the Alpha added quietly, his voice low but full of threat. "Because you are the key to it all. They believe you hold the power to destroy what we've built. And they won't stop until they have you." Her heart raced in her chest. "Why me?" The Alpha didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved quickly, pulling her behind him as the pack braced themselves. The Beta stepped forward, ready to confront the attackers, but the Alpha's voice rang out before he could move. "Not yet." The pack froze, waiting for the Alpha's next command. He turned to the Beta, his eyes filled with an urgency she hadn't seen before. "We need to stall them. We can't let them breach the inner defenses. The pack won't survive if they do." The Beta nodded, his expression resolute. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." The Alpha turned to her, his expression softening for a brief moment before the cold, commanding leader returned. "Stay inside. I'll protect you, but you have to trust me. If I say move, you move." Without waiting for a response, he moved toward the door, his body tense, his every step exuding the unspoken promise of battle. She didn't want to be left behind, but she knew that she was no match for the threat outside. The rogues' pack, the Red Fangs. They were all hunting her, trying to tear apart everything the Alpha had built. She had to stay back. But the idea of waiting, of doing nothing while the Alpha fought for her, made her heart twist in agony. The Beta slammed the door shut behind them, the sound of the wood reverberating in the silence that followed. "Stay inside. Trust the Alpha," he said, his voice grim. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she nodded silently, her hands trembling at her sides. The walls of the stronghold were thick, but they wouldn't be enough to keep the invaders out for long. Her gaze shifted toward the entrance, the heavy silence outside making her stomach churn. "Please," she whispered under her breath, the fear rising like a wave in her chest. "Please come back." The sound of battle reached her ears, distant at first, then louder and more intense as the minutes dragged on. Her hands gripped the stone walls, the cold seeped into her skin as she waited, heart in her throat. She could hear the ferocious growls of wolves, the shouts of the pack as they clashed with the invaders. And then, the worst sound, a sudden, horrific roar. Her heart stopped. She knew that roar. It was the Alpha's. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat, but there was no way out. The battle was reaching its breaking point. The door rattled behind her, and she turned back toward it, her mind racing. Was it the Alpha? But the door didn't open. The weight of the moment hung in the air. The real war was upon them, and with it came a question she couldn't escape. Would the Alpha make it out alive? Chapter 10. Betrayal in the Shadows. The roar of the Alpha, primal and filled with fury, still echoed in her ears, a bone-deep reminder of the chaos raging outside. Her pulse thudded in her throat, her body tense with fear and uncertainty. Every moment that passed, every growl and clash of teeth, made her feel more powerless. The walls of the stronghold were thick, but it was a hollow kind of protection, like a cage. She was safe, but only for as long as the Alpha and the pack held their ground. She couldn't sit still. Her legs wouldn't stop moving, her hands shaking at her sides. The instinct to be out there with them, to fight, to help, was suffocating. But she knew she had no place out there, not yet. "Come back," she whispered to the empty air, her voice trembling. "Please, come back." The seconds stretched into eternity, and still the roars and growls outside only intensified. She pressed her ear to the door, trying to catch any sound that would tell her what was happening, but there was nothing, only the sounds of battle, the desperate cries of wolves, and the low hum of tension in the air. Suddenly the door trembled. Her heart skipped. She rushed to it, her fingers flying over the cold handle, but it was locked tight. There was no way out. Then she heard it again, the sound of claws scraping against stone, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone stumbling, their breath ragged, desperate. Her heart surged in her chest. "Alpha," she whispered, barely able to breathe. The door rattled again, and she hurried back to it, pressing her ear against the cold wood. There was a muffled shout, something familiar, something filled with pain. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't just the Alpha's voice, there was something else. A second voice. "No," she whispered, her breath catching in her throat. "Not him, not now, the Beta." Her hand trembled on the handle, but before she could react, the door burst open with a force that knocked her back. She stumbled, falling to the floor, her heart hammering in her chest. And then, standing in the doorway, was the Alpha, bloodied, his eyes wild with something she had never seen before. There was something dark in his gaze, something desperate. "Get up," he commanded, his voice hoarse but filled with authority. "Now." She scrambled to her feet, her heart racing. She wanted to rush to him, to make sure he was okay, but the sight of him, his clothes torn, his body battered and bruised, stopped her in her tracks. He wasn't just hurt, he was broken. "Alpha," she whispered, her voice trembling as she reached for him. But he stepped back, shaking his head. "No, stay back," he growled, his voice filled with barely contained fury. "I told you to stay inside. Now we need to move." "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the fear creeping up on her, thick and suffocating. "Where's the Beta?" The Alpha's expression darkened, his jaw clenched tight as he looked past her, his eyes flickering to the pack's gathered members. "He didn't make it," he said, his voice cold. "He betrayed us." Her heart froze. "Betrayed? The Beta?" He nodded sharply, his eyes flashing with anger. "He's been playing both sides. He made a deal with the Red Fangs. He's the reason they're here." She staggered back, the weight of his words slamming into her like a physical blow. "No, that can't be true." The Alpha's eyes locked onto hers, hard and unwavering. "It is—" She shook her head, trying to make sense of it. "But why? Why would he—" "Because he's always been after power," the Alpha interrupted, his voice dark with disgust. "He wanted control over the pack, over me, and he thought he could use you to get it." Her stomach twisted as realization began to settle in. The Beta, her ally, her supposed protector, had been working against the pack all along. He hadn't just been a part of the attack, he had orchestrated it. "Where is he?" she demanded, her eyes searching the Alphas, desperation in her voice. "He's gone." The Alpha's voice was like steel. "He's run. He knows the pack won't follow him anymore. He's likely gone to the Red Fangs to take control." She couldn't process it all. The beta, her beta, the one who had trained with her, fought by her side, had been against her all along. "We can't stay here," the Alpha continued, his tone hardening. "We need to leave, now. The Red Fangs are coming. They know we've lost the beta, and they'll be here any minute." Her heart raced again, and for the first time since she had met the Alpha, she saw the weight of the battle truly pressing down on him. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was a fight for everything. The pack, their lives, and now, for the future of everything they had built. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The Alpha's eyes darkened, and he turned toward the pack, his expression resolute. "We move toward the highlands. There's an old stronghold there, more secure. We can regroup, and I'll get you out of here." "I'm not going anywhere without you," she said quickly, her voice thick with emotion. The Alpha turned back to her, his gaze softening for a split second before he masked it again. "You will if it means surviving. You don't belong in this fight, and I won't risk losing you." Her heart tightened in her chest. "I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice firm despite the overwhelming fear. "If I go with you. We survive together." He didn't answer immediately. For a long, silent moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. And then he gave a small nod. "Together, then." As they began to move toward the door, the sounds of the Red Fangs grew louder. The distant growls of wolves, the eerie quiet of their footsteps, it was clear they were closing in. And just as the Alpha stepped outside, the ground trembled again. This time, it wasn't just wolves. It was an army, coming from every direction. The pack was outnumbered, and as the Alpha turned to face the approaching storm, he looked at her one last time. "Get to the highlands, I'll hold them off," but the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't planning on making it out alive. Chapter 11. The Final Stand. The Alpha's words hung in the air like a death sentence. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the overwhelming weight of what was about to happen. The pack was outnumbered. The Red Fangs were closing in, and the Alpha, her Alpha, was willing to sacrifice himself to ensure she got to safety. "No," she whispered, her chest tightening as the cold realization gripped her heart. "I won't leave you." The Alpha's gaze was unyielding as he turned to face her. There was no softness in his eyes, no room for argument. "You must," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "The pack needs you. You're the future of this." "No." Her voice cracked with desperation, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. "Not without you. I'm not leaving you behind." He took a step forward, his eyes fierce. "You are the future," he repeated, his voice like iron. "This pack will survive, but you will survive only if you go. You cannot carry this burden alone. I've made sure of that. Now, you have to live." Her legs felt like lead, every part of her wanting to scream, to fight, to run toward him and refuse to let him go. "I'm not strong enough," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm nothing without you." The Alpha's expression softened, just a fraction, but there was no mistaking the determination in his eyes. "You are everything," he said quietly. "And everything I fought for." He took her hand, his grip fierce but filled with something warmer, something that felt like hope. "I'll hold them off," he said, his voice steady. "You go. You live. You carry on." She wanted to argue, wanted to scream at him to stay, to protect her, but the look in his eyes told her that this was not a fight he could win. Not now, not with her standing in the way. With a heavy heart, she nodded. "I'll survive. For you." Without another word, he turned and faced the pack, his body shifting back into its wolf form with a fluid grace that was terrifying in its power. The pack followed his lead, their snarls and growls echoing through the trees as they prepared to face the Red Fangs head-on. "Go!" The Alpha's voice rang out, his command cutting through the tension like a knife. "Now!" With one final glance at him, she turned and ran. The journey to the highlands felt like a blur, the fear and adrenaline spurring her on, but the weight of the Alpha's sacrifice pressed heavily on her chest. She wanted to look back, to run back to him, but she knew deep down that doing so would only put her in danger. As she reached the foot of the mountain, her legs giving way under the strain, she finally stopped. The silence was deafening, the only sound her labored breathing. But even in the silence she could hear the distant roars, the growls, the sound of the battle that was raging in the clearing below. And for the first time, she realized what the Alpha had truly meant. She had to survive, for him, for the pack, for herself. "I won't forget you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I swear it." Chapter 12. The Weight of Survival. Days passed as she moved deeper into the highlands, the vastness of the mountains surrounding her like a cold, silent tomb. The further she went, the more she realized how much had been lost. The pack, the Alpha, everything she had once known. Every step felt like an eternity, and yet she couldn't bring herself to slow down. The world felt heavy, its weight pressing down on her soul. She could still hear the battle in her mind, the roar of the Alpha, the crash of wolves fighting, the scream of betrayal echoing through the forest. Every time she closed her eyes, it felt like she could still see him, his eyes, his strength, his sacrifice. But now, all she had left was the promise he made to her. "You survive. You live." But how? She reached a small cave halfway up the mountain, the rock walls cool and smooth beneath her fingertips. She had no plan. She had no direction. All she knew was that the world felt empty without the Alpha by her side, and yet she had to continue. She was alive. She was the future. But at what cost? As she sat in the cave, her knees drawn to her chest, the wind howled outside, carrying with it the bitter scent of defeat. And in that moment, she realized something profound. The battle wasn't over. The Red Fangs would not stop, and neither would the wolves of the pack. They would come for her. They would come for the Alpha's legacy. They would come for the future she represented. But she wouldn't face it alone. "I will carry on," she whispered the words to herself, her voice strong and filled with the fire of survival. And as the first light of dawn broke over the highlands, the storm inside her began to settle. The Alpha had shown her what it meant to be strong, to fight, to survive. Now it was her turn to live. But as she looked toward the horizon, she couldn't shake the feeling that the war was not over. The Red Fangs had already made their move, but she knew they weren't done yet, and neither was she. Just as she gathered the strength to stand, the wind shifted. She could feel it. Someone was watching her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as a figure emerged from the shadows of the cave entrance. Her heart stopped. The Beta. But he was not alone. Behind him stood a familiar figure, the Alpha. "I told you," the Beta said, his voice cold and filled with contempt. "The battle isn't over. The real fight starts now." And as the Alpha stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating, she realized the truth. The war for her heart, and for the pack, was only just beginning. Chapter 13. The Price of Power. The world around her seemed to fade away, leaving only the figure of the beta standing at the entrance of the cave, his gaze hard, calculating. But behind him, in the shadows of the highlands, was the unmistakable silhouette of the Alpha, alive and standing, though there was something about him that didn't seem quite right. She felt her heart stop for a moment, the air in her lungs thick with shock and confusion. The beta was here, and the Alpha. The Alpha had survived, but at what cost? She stepped back, her mind racing. She had left everything behind to survive, to honor the promise the Alpha had made to her. But now, standing before her, was the man she had feared was lost to her forever. And yet, something about him had changed. His eyes, once filled with fierce determination, were now shadowed with something darker, something heavy. The beta's voice broke through the silence, sharp and biting. "You thought the Alpha was dead, didn't you?" He stepped forward, his gaze flicking to her with a coldness that sent a shiver down her spine. "But I told you, he isn't done yet. Neither of us are." The Alpha said nothing, but his eyes never left hers. His presence filled the small cave, a dark storm that pressed against her chest, reminding her of the power he wielded. But there was something wrong. The bond between them that had once felt unbreakable, tethering her to him, was now frayed, strained. He didn't seem like the man she had left behind. His form was the same, strong and imposing, but the light in his eyes had dimmed. The warmth that had once sparked between them felt absent, replaced by a cool detachment. "You don't have to fight alone," the beta continued, his voice low and coaxing. "The Alpha's return isn't a gift, it's a burden, and you're the one who's going to carry it." Her heart clenched at the words, carry it. What did he mean by that? What had the Alpha become? She glanced at him, searching his face for some sign of the man she had once known, but all she saw was a mask of resolve, hardened by whatever battles he had fought in her absence. The Alpha's voice, when it came, was low and raspy, as though it hadn't been used in far too long. "We've lost everything," he said, his words carrying a weight that seemed to push against her chest. "The pack is broken. The Red Fangs are only the beginning." Her stomach churned at the mention of the Red Fangs. "What happened?" she asked, her voice small in the face of the power that surrounded them. The Alpha stepped forward, his gaze still unwavering. "The beta's betrayal was just the start. The Red Fangs are hunting us, but they're not the only ones. There are wolves far older and far more dangerous than the ones we've fought." Her pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" The Alpha's eyes darkened, and for the first time she saw a flicker of uncertainty in them. "I don't know who they are, but I know what they want, and it's you." She took a step back, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "Me?" The beta's smirk widened. "Not just you, but you're the key to everything. The power thereafter, it's yours." Her mind raced as the realization hit her like a slap. The power. The Alpha's claim on her. The strange bond that had connected them, the growing sense of destiny, it was all part of something much larger than her. The Alpha's eyes softened just for a moment, and for the briefest of seconds, she saw the man she had loved. Before the war, before the betrayal, before the bloodshed. "I never wanted this for you," he said, his voice filled with regret. "But they'll come for you, whether you're ready or not, and I'll protect you, no matter the cost." Tears blurred her vision, but she wiped them away quickly, refusing to let him see her weakness. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. The beta stepped forward, his tone cold and final. "You've already given them everything they need. The war is here, and now it's time for you to choose your side." The Alpha's gaze flickered to the beta, and there was a silent exchange between them. A deep understanding, a shared history of blood and sacrifice. "Choose?" she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. The Alpha turned back to her, his eyes steady, unwavering. You will stand with us or against us. The pack is divided, but the future is yours to claim. Her heart raced in her chest. The tension in the air was suffocating. I don't want this, she said, her voice breaking, her hands trembling. I just want to survive. The Alpha took a step toward her, his presence enveloping her like a storm. Survival means more than just living. It means fighting for what you believe in, for what we are, for what the pack is. Her breath hitched. The weight of his words, the finality in his tone, crushed her. What if I'm not strong enough? She asked, her voice trembling. The Alpha reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his touch warm and comforting, despite the turmoil in his eyes. You don't have to be strong. Not alone. You never were alone. But the words didn't offer the comfort they once had. He had changed. The bond between them had changed. I can't do this, she whispered, pulling away from his touch. I can't be the one to decide, not anymore. The Alpha's expression softened, but there was no softness in his eyes, only a quiet, resigned understanding. Then let me make the choice for you. The pack was in disarray, the future uncertain. As the Alpha and the Beta stood before her, their shadows stretching long across the cave floor, the weight of what was about to happen pressed on her chest like an unbearable force. I've made my choice, the Alpha said, his voice steady but filled with something darker, and I choose you. But not just for me, for the pack, for what we stand for. I choose to fight. But as the words left her lips, the ground beneath them shook once more, and the sound of howls, many howls, rose from the distance. The Red Fangs were coming, and this time they wouldn't stop until everything was destroyed. The real battle had only just begun. Chapter 14. The Dawn of a New Era. The wind howled through the highlands, the cold cutting deep into her skin. The Alpha stood beside her, his presence a constant force of strength, but she could feel the weight of the world pressing down on them. The Red Fangs were out there, but so was their future, and it was up to her to shape it. The pack had begun to rally behind them, pulling together in the face of the impending storm. Despite the chaos, the Alpha was determined to protect them, to ensure that the legacy of the pack would continue. He had claimed her as his mate, but it wasn't just about their bond anymore. It was about the pack, about the future of their world, and what they could accomplish together. As they stood at the edge of the mountain, the sky began to lighten. The first rays of dawn peeked over the horizon, casting a soft glow across the jagged peaks of the highlands. It was beautiful, but the stillness of the moment was fleeting. The battle would come soon enough. It's not over, she whispered, more to herself than to the Alpha. His gaze flickered to hers, and for a moment there was nothing but silence between them. The weight of their shared history, their unspoken connection, was heavy, but it wasn't a burden anymore. It was a bond, one that was growing stronger, despite the darkness that surrounded them. No, he said, his voice steady, but it will be. Together, we will make sure of it. The Beta was still out there, somewhere, but there was no room for doubt now. She had made her choice. She would stand with the Alpha, with the pack, against whatever threats the Red Fangs or anyone else posed. The future of the pack depended on them. She was no longer just a symbol. She was the leader they needed. As the pack gathered around them, ready to fight for their future, she felt a surge of strength coursing through her. The Alpha's touch was firm on her back, but it wasn't just his strength she felt. It was the strength of the pack, of everything they had fought for. They would rise together or fall together. The final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Her place was with them, with the Alpha, with the pack. She wasn't just the mate anymore. She was the heart of their future. The time for running was over. The battle for the pack, for survival, for everything they believed in, was beginning, and no matter what happened, she would fight beside them. "Let's end this," she said, her voice clear and full of resolve. The Alpha turned to her, his eyes fierce with determination. Together, and as they walked toward the battlefield side by side, the weight of their world on their shoulders, one thing was certain. The war for their future was only beginning. But this time, they would fight for each other. Epilogue, a legacy reborn. Months passed, and the battles became memories, fading into the distance. The Red Fangs were defeated, their power shattered by the unity and strength of the pack. The Alpha stood beside her, their bond unbreakable, a new era rising in the aftermath of the storm. The pack had grown stronger, and with her leadership, they rebuilt what had been lost. The stronghold was now a symbol of their unity, a reminder of the sacrifices made for the future. Together, they had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. As she stood at the edge of the stronghold, looking out over the land, she felt the weight of everything they had fought for, and the hope of everything they had built. The pack was strong. They had survived, and they would thrive. Her heart was no longer heavy with the burden of what had been lost. It was filled with the promise of the future. The war was over, and with the Alpha by her side, she knew that they had claimed a legacy that would last for generations to come.